Before you use the jig to cut your neck angle and the mortise in your body, you need to dial some things in, especially when it comes time to use the dovetail. You want this to, so when the neck fits onto the body, it's just a hair proud. That way you have a little wiggle room to adjust the angle if you need to and get it to slide right down into the joint. So I never try and cut it perfect. Now you can get it really close. What I need to do is set this. This is the mortise side of the dovetail, and I've got this set to approximately a little bit less than the body depth of my guitar. And then this is the tenon side of the dovetail joint, which is going to be on the neck. I've made myself some mock neck and body here. This will be the body, this will be the neck. Notice I've cut a 1/4 inch slot for my truss rod. That way I can just put it right into the jig and clamp it in. And I'm going to do a couple of test pieces to make sure that this is going to get dialed in correctly. To do my test cuts, I'm going to be using a 5/8 inch outside diameter guide bushing in a plunge router. To hog out the majority of the material, I'm going to be using a 3/8 inch straight cut bit, 1/2 inch shank, and to come in and put the taper on the side of the walls of the dovetail, mortise and tenon, I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch shank, 7-degree taper dovetail bit. Now to do your test cuts, you don't have to cut to the full depth. Just a little bit is all it takes, just to make sure that you're dialing in the tolerances. Once you go ahead and do the final cuts on your mortise and tenon, I'm going to cut the actual mortise of the dovetail in the body to about a 1/2 inch and just a skosh less on the tenon so that they don't butt up against each other. I want a little space in the joint. So in the router, I'm going to put the 5/8 inch outside diameter guide bushing, like so. And to make sure that that is centered, I'm going to be using a centering pin. Just put that in your router and center that guide bushing. To hog out the majority of the cut, I'm going to be using the 3/8 inch straight cut bit. Obviously you want to make sure that the bit is tight into the collet. No surprises while we're working. Now to do my test pieces, this is going to simulate the body. And I'm going to come in and place it inside the mortise side. Make sure that it's centered, and then clamp it up. This is what it looks like from the top side. The block of wood that's simulating the body is clamped into here. Notice I have a center line on here. And the first time I use the jig, I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut this piece as well. So that will get notched on the first time you use the jig. So let's put the neck on the other side. On this side where the neck goes in, notice I have my 1/4 inch slot drilled for my truss rod. That just gets put right onto those dowels I put in there. Bump it all the way up to the top. And come in and use your clamp to clamp it up. Now on my test piece, I left a lot of excess so I can continue just chopping off the tenon each time, just keep testing. So this one will not be able to fit on there, but just one is enough. So here's what the neck piece looks like when it's placed into the jig. And that's where I'll cut the tenon side of the dovetail. Now when cutting a mortise and tenon dovetail for your neck to body joint, you hog out the majority of it with the straight cut bit. Then you have to switch bits. Now the beauty of this jig is that you have the neck on one side and the body on the other side, so all you have to do is switch bits. You don't have to cut one, pull the neck or the body out of the jig, do the other, and then swap bits and then put the other one back in. You can do it in just 2 steps. Hog it out on both sides, mortise and tenon of the dovetail, and then come in, switch the bit, and then cut the angle. So it makes it a lot easier. I'm going to start by cutting the body side, in other words the mortise, but it really doesn't matter. You could do either side. Now normally, when doing this step, I would be standing on this side of the jig, but for the ease of the filming here, I'm going to stand on the opposite side of the jig, and I'm going to allow you to see what's going on this side. I'm going to start by bottoming out my router, and you only need to go about 3/16 to 1/4 inch, not very much. This is just a test piece. I want to make sure that the angles are correct and the depth I'm cutting as far as how far into the body and how far into the neck is correct. After you get that dialed in, then you can go in, and the max of the cut I'm going to do would be 1/2 inch. But you don't need to do that on your test pieces. So it's bottomed out, and I'm going to go just a skosh more and make that first cut.
So there's my test cut. Notice I've gone in just a little bit, maybe about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to go on the other side now and do the tenon about the same amount. Then I'll check the fit. So here's the piece of wood that's going to simulate the neck or the tenon side. I have not adjusted the angle of the shelf. I'm just cutting it at 90 degrees right now. All I'm doing is checking for fit. I'm going to cut the same amount on this one, which was about 1/8 of an inch, not very much. This is what this cut looks like. Notice I've cut just about the same amount, about 1/8 of an inch, ran around the template. Now notice the fuzzies over here. That's going to happen. So if you're one of those kind of guys that likes to shape the neck before you fit it to the body, then you need to come in and put a little masking tape or something like here to kind of hold that edge together as the router comes around, so you don't get that blowout or those fuzzies on there. If you're the kind of guy that likes to fit the neck and then carve it, then you're okay. Don't worry about the fuzzies. So the next thing I'm going to do is come in and swap the bit out. I have to take the straight cut bit out and put in the dovetail bit. When you're installing the dovetail bit, the tolerances are pretty tight on that guide bushing, so you may need to plunge the router a little bit and then insert the dovetail bit in through the top. Remember, the bit gets narrower the closer you get to the shank, and you're going to be cutting your max depth at about 1/2 inch anyway. So the widest part is on the outside of the guide bushing. As it narrows, it fits through the guide bushing. So I'm using a 7-degree taper on my dovetail bit. Now you can get these bits from LMI. If you decide to go with store-bought bits, that's fine. You may just need to dial in your tolerances. In other words, use a different size bit. You have to use a different size guide bushing. But it's very easy, just dial it in. So now with the bit in there, I can go in and cut the angle on the mortise and the tenon. With the dovetail bit installed, I can now come in and make the cut, and it doesn't matter whether you do the neck or the body side first. I'm going to be cutting at exactly the same depth though. All I'm going to be doing is cutting the angle on the side of that tenon there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the mortise or the body side. One thing you want to be extremely careful is when you turn off your router. If you remove the router before the bit stops, that thing's spinning around down there. Remember, you can booger up your template. And that's never a good thing. In fact, the technical term for that could be bad. You don't want to booger up your template. Probably the best thing is just to turn the router off, leave it sitting on top of the jig and the template until that bit completely stops turning. I'm now able to remove the piece of wood that is simulating the body from the jig. And there's the tenon. It's got the angle of the dovetail on there. Notice I didn't cut very deep, just about 1/8 of an inch. And now I can come in and slide the tenon into there to see if I have the correct depth this way on the mortise and the tenon. Here's the block of wood that's simulating the neck. So I've pulled that out, and there's the tenon. It has the angle cut on the side of it. Now let's place the two together and see how we did. That gets placed on there like that, slides in. So it's just a little bit proud. I've got about 1/4 inch proud. Now I think I can dial that in a little bit closer. It's not much though. Now you want a little bit of wiggle room there so that you can adjust the joint together if you have to adjust your neck angle. Now I haven't even talked about neck angle yet. Right now I'm just dialing in the tolerances for the fit. We'll talk about angle when we actually go to use the jig
on the guitar, because that's where we set the angle. But right now I think I can slide it in. I think I can take about a half of that 1/4 inch, maybe dial it in a little bit closer. So the way I'm going to do that is adjust the templates on the top of the jig. So here's the top of the jig. I got the mortise on one side, this is the body, the tenon on the other side, this is the neck. Now the body side I really can't adjust, because if I adjust it down more, then I'll blow through the whole body as I'm cutting the joint. I don't want to do that. I want to cut just a little bit shy of the binding as I'm cutting into the top of the body where the neck's going to go. So I need to adjust the tenon side. So here are my test pieces. This simulates the body. Notice I can't go any more. If not, I'll just blow out the top side and you'll be able to see that angle on the back of the guitar. You don't want to do that. So here's the tenon. This is the neck. As it slides in, I'm just a little bit proud. So I need to make this smaller. If I make this a little bit smaller, then it will slide farther into the joint. So to make the tenon smaller, if I come in and adjust the template, I can slide it back. That allows this to become narrower because I'm not cutting in quite as far on the neck. I just slide this back. Now I can tighten up my template. And I can go through that whole operation again. I'll place the neck in the bottom of the jig here. I'll center it. I'll cut the joint again. Now, since I've already hogged the majority of the material out with the straight cut bit, I'm just going to use the dovetail bit at this time, because all I'm going to do is just cut a little bit on the side of that tenon, and that's it. So here I am placing the neck back in. It's real easy to do because I've got the 1/4 inch space there for my truss rod. Place it in there, make sure it bottoms out at the top up there up against the template, and come in and clamp it off. Once again, I'm going to take my router and cut a little bit more off the width of that tenon. I can now remove the neck from the jig and slide it into the tenon, into the mortise again, or the body part, and see if it fits. So now I can release the toggle clamp, pull the neck out. There's my tenon. It should be a little bit narrower now, which will allow it to slide into the body or to the mortise part a little bit more. Let's see how it did. So here are my two pieces. This simulates the body, this simulates the neck, and in we go. I'm a little bit closer. Now, if you're okay with that amount, that's probably pretty good. I'm looking at probably a little bit more than 1/8, maybe 3/16. And that allows you to come in later, shape the sides of the tenon, and allow it to slide down in there. And you can also adjust the angle if you need to. Now, with this jig, you can dial that angle in pretty close before you actually cut it. If you want to dial it in a little bit closer, you can. But I like to leave myself a little wiggle room in case I need to adjust it on the fly for the angle to get the correct gap on my straight edge back at the bridge location. So if you want to dial in your tolerances a little bit more and you want to do it on the mortise side, you can. Just loosen this up a little bit. And then come in and slide your tenon back just a skosh. That's going to make this just a little bit bigger. And allowing that, if that's a little bit bigger, then that will allow your tenon to slide in just a skosh more. Tighten it back up and recut it. Here's a little tip so you're not always looking for your Allen tool. Just drill a hole in the top of your template or the top of your jig right there. Place it in, you're good to go. That way it's always at hand when you need it. If you decide to adjust it on the mortise side, be careful that you're not sliding your template so far back that you're going to go through and cut that 1/2 inch deep all the way into the back side. You don't want to do that. You want to leave a little space. I usually cut right up to about the binding, and that's it. So now we can take this out of here and check it again for fit. So here it is. I've cut almost all the way to the back. That's farther than what I would usually take it, because I usually like to leave a 1/4 inch, which is usually the binding, and then I stop the mortise right in there. This is just to dial in the cut, so I'm checking it here. So here's the body, here's the neck. Now I'm much closer to my final tolerance. I'm probably about 1/8 of an inch proud, and that's plenty. That will slide right down in there when you're adjusting this, just by coming in and sanding that edge just a little bit. So I think I've got this dialed in about where I want it. So the dovetail is dialed in. You can mark that on your jig if you want to. There's lines on your template if you want to mark that on your jig. For that body size, OM, approximately that depth, then you know exactly where you need to be. If you want to test the mortise and tenon, you can. Just come in and place this on your jig. Replace the dovetail templates with the mortise and tenon templates. For setting up the mortise side of the mortise and tenon cut, you want to adjust this template so that you're at the approximate depth of your guitar. Now, on my OEM model of guitars, they come out to about 80 millimeters deep. That's without the top and the back. With the top and the back, it's going to be about 85 millimeters. But I don't want to cut 80. I want to cut a little bit shy of that. So I'm going to come in and cut about 75 or so. That should be just about to the edge of the binding. And I'll come in and tighten the template down and go ahead and install the tenon side as well. Now the tenon side, it doesn't really matter how far forward or back you are. All you want to do is make sure, since this is straight, that you're cutting all the way to the edge of the neck. If this is too far forward, obviously you're not getting all the way to the end of the neck. So just slide it in there, butt it up where it needs to be, and make sure that you can cut all the way through. Once it's in place, snug up the screws. And coming in and use your straight cut bit to make the cut. For doing the mortise and tenon cut, I use the 5/8 inch outside diameter guide bushing again with a 1/2 inch straight cut bit. And make sure that it is tight so that you have no surprises when making the cut. Now, since I have test pieces, all I need to do is cut that off of my chop saw, and I can use these pieces again. So here's my scrap piece that's going to simulate the body of the guitar. Come in there and place it roughly centered, and come in, clamp it up. Now when you're actually doing the body of the guitar has a radius on it, so you want to make sure that that thing stays up snug against the bottom of the template. There's no gap around it, because sometimes as you clamp it, it likes to force it one way or the other. Alright, so there's the body of the guitar. Let's go ahead and do the tenon. And here's my block wood that I've cut off the old joint. I can come in, I've got my truss rod slot, slides right onto those dowels, bump it up against the bottom of the template, and come in and clamp it off. Now I can go ahead and cut that. Notice that my tenon on the template is longer than what my neck blank is. Now if you're doing deeper body guitar, that's not much of an issue because your neck would be hanging over. But if you're doing little shallow body guitars, like the OM's a little narrower at that end, on the neck end, then what you would need to do is just route out a little bit more up here, slide that template a little bit farther forward so that this doesn't come all the way to the edge. Now for me, it's not really a big deal, because what I like to do is just go ahead and cut it, then I come in and chisel that tenon back just a little bit. And I'll show you how to do that when we actually do this on a guitar. Right now, this is all test pieces, so what I'm looking for is dialing in the width of the tenon to the mortise and make sure that they are correct with the specs that I'm using. 5/8 inch outside diameter guide bushing with a 1/2 inch straight cut bit. So once again, it doesn't matter which end you cut first, the mortise or the tenon. I just happen to be here on the tenon side, so I'll do that one first. I'm going to bottom it out and go just a little bit more, about 1/8 of an inch maybe. This is just a test piece, so it doesn't have to go very deep. Make sure your router stops spinning, then remove it. That way you don't booger up your template. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the mortise side. So here's the mortise that's been cut in the body. The width of that really only needs to be about as wide as that barrel nut, because that's what's going to go crossways through the tenon, and that's what's going to be used to bolt the neck on. Now, if you like the traditional classical heel cap down here, the pointed heel cap, when you actually carve the bottom side of your neck, then you may want to make this a little bit narrower so you can make a little narrower heel cap. And all you would need to do is just wrap some tape or something around in there to kind of close that up a little bit so it's not quite as wide. But that's about right. I've got about a 1/16 on either side of that barrel nut right now. So that's going to work. So now I'm going to remove my test pieces from the jig and check the fit. Here's the body, and on this side I've got the tenon, or the neck. Now you'll notice that since my neck is too wide, or my test piece is too wide, I've got some scrap over here. I'm just going to come in and bandsaw that off of there. Normally you would have already done that anyway with your neck. I like to pre-shape it a little bit. Also, remember I talked about fuzzies on the edge, so if you're the guy that likes to carve right up to your final measurement, you want to put some masking tape or something on there so it doesn't blow that out. But since this is nowhere near my final measurement, I'm just going to zip it through my bandsaw and cut off that excess real quick. Alright, I just put it through my bandsaw and just zipped off these corners. Normally I would have already done that on the neck before I put it into the jig. So let's check the fit. So here's my neck, here's my body. If I go to place them together, they should not fit. And they don't. I'm about a 30-seconds too wide on my tenon, which is the way I like to do my necks. I like to have to adjust it. Just a couple of quick passes on here, and I'll show you how to do that with a little block plane or a file or something. Brings that right down so it fits in there snug. Now the reason why I do that is because if your heel block is a little off or you have a slight twist in your neck, then you can adjust that on the fly. So let's do a little handwork to make that fit. So I've got my neck, or my piece that simulates my neck, clamped into my vise, and what I'm going to use is what's called rabbiting plane. The blade goes all the way across it. That way you can just place it on the side here and come in and take a little bit off that tenon like that. And just a few passes is all it takes. Another good reason for cutting the tenon a little bit on the large side is that if your truss rod happens to be just a little bit left or right of center, you can come in and fix that as well. Now be careful about going all the way to the edge here, because you can blow it out. So if you want to come in through there and just take a couple passes on the edge there, you can. And that should be enough to do it. So here's my neck. I've taken just a couple of passes along the edge there. Here's my body. I'm just going to place it over the top, and it fits. There it is. Now notice that the fretboard and the top of the soundboard are not flush, so you need to do a little handwork there as well, just by taking off this back side of the tenon here, or come in and adjusting your template so that when you get done cutting, it will be flush. But it's very easy to just chisel off the back of that just a little bit. And here's how you would do that. Just come in, make sure you're on the same plane as the shoulders, and come in and just pop that off. Just take little bites. Until you're back where you need to be. And just a few passes with your chisel, and you've got that taken care of as well. Now you could dial it in with your templates, just adjust your templates, and it's the same thing. We just keep nibbling away at it here. And that should be fairly close. So let's check it. So I've come in and nibbled back the end of this tenon here so that my body, when it fits on there now, will be flush on the side where the fretboard comes in. Now notice that the end of my tenon is square and the end of my mortise is round. If you wanted to, you could come in and just nibble these back a little bit, clip those off of there, and round it up if you wanted to. I usually just cut the tenon a little bit shorter so it doesn't bottom out all the way and doesn't need to be rounded. But there you go. So So now that I've trimmed that, I've got just a little bit of wiggle room left and right, so it's not exactly snug in there. It's pretty close. So if I ever need to tip it one way or the other because my heel block is a little out of square or alignment, or my neck has a slight twist to it, I now have that wiggle room. I've also got the wiggle room this way, and so it's good to go. So the jig is dialed in. The next thing to do is come in and test it on an actual guitar.